More than 15 years of media planning and buying experience, has worked across a range of clients, including Revlon, USAA, which did develop, by the way, the first app that you cash a check with, Starwood Hotels and Resorts, and Eastman Kodak. Please join me in welcoming Jamie and his panel.
Is this on? Yeah, okay. Thanks, Chuck. Really appreciate it. Thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to these panelists. I thought we'd just do a quick start by way of introduction. I thought I'd have each of these guys talk for a minute or so about who they are, what they're responsible for, and then we can jump in. Chuck introduced me. The reason Chuck asked me to do this is because in 2011, I had an idea for an app. And the idea was it was an app called Happy Nester. And it was all about services for home furniture, how to find the right furniture for your house, how to get access to interior designers. And I thought it was brilliant. It had multiple sources of revenue that would feed into this app. I got to the point where I was going to go out and speak to investors about it, and ultimately, it never left really my brain. It didn't monetize. It didn't even get to a reasonably good wireframe. So, who else would be better to moderate this than someone who's been, seen the how difficult it can be to be successful in this space. So that's why I'm here. But these guys have probably more appropriate, better experience than I do.
That's an awesome story.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll start. Hey, friends. My name is Mike Brooks. I'm the SVP of Revenue at WeatherBug. I manage direct sales, programmatic sales, BD, partnerships, basically all business that comes into WeatherBug. WeatherBug is an app that connects with 10 million users every month in the US. We are, if you think about our business, we're very heavy on the mobile app side. We're about 95% of our revenue comes through mobile app. But I think we're going to talk about a couple interesting things today, like directions we're going, world of OTT, et cetera, and kind of where we're expanding the brand as a publisher. And from that, we're a small team, right? So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today are coming from a position of resource constraint, not necessarily money, just people. So I'm going to talk about some of the decisions we make. We've had a very successful business so far. We're about 30 people, 22 are engineers. So we're very compact on the business side. And we're going to explain some of the decisions we have to make around that and some of the things that have gotten us there. But even in the past 6 months, the revenue run rate has increased 50%. We know how our competitors monetize and we crush them. So we're really happy to share some of the things that we can do that go well. So any questions? Happy to hang.
Hello, I'm Ashley Rankin with Reddit. I manage our performance sales team on the East Coast. Our performance sales team looks after primarily DR advertisers, so a lot of app install campaigns, but really the crux of what we manage is people who are looking for stuff, past reach, past impressions, installs, post installs. Reddit is a network of communities. Our team looks after a bunch of advertisers who, like I said, are looking for post install metrics, and I think that's it.
Hey, how's it going? Rick Welch, Flipboard. For those of you unfamiliar with Flipboard, we are a content aggregation and distribution app. So we have integrations with over 3,000 different publishers worldwide. Every one of the big names you can imagine, Hearst, Condé Nast, Vice, Vox, etc. I run programmatic operations and sales. So it's kind of a hybrid position, general management, I guess. So yeah, working with the sales team, making sure they understand ad tech, programmatic, et cetera, going on ride-along sales meetings with them. It's a global role. Flipboard, again, has integrations with publishers worldwide. We have over 100 million users globally, about 20 million or so in the US, give or take. Similar to Mike, we have resource constraints. I think a lot of people can can, I guess, feel the same way. But we have about 120 employees at this point, probably about 50% engineering. Programmatic is a lean team of 4 people at this point. So it's been trying to divide it down the middle, 2 sales, 2 ops. But yeah, trying to get a lot done with a little is something we have going on as well.
Is the 4 of those, that's the whole global team, or is that just US?
Yeah, we have a seller in Europe, programmatic sales guy in Europe. I have an open headcount in the US right now, and I can't seem to find anyone. So if you know someone, let me know. And then I have a programmatic ops guy who came from MoPub, who was a Steel, who knows all this stuff inside and out, workhorse. And then I have a contractor in India who is awesome. A lot of bang for the buck there. But yeah, trying to get a lot done with a little is, it's not Condé Nast, where I came from before, which was just, whatever. We got resources, it's fine.
Cool. Hey, I thought it would be a good place to start. This is all about how apps make money. Each of your businesses is uniquely different, started from different places. I know for Ashley and Reddit in January of this year, you guys really launched your performance business and launched a CPC product. Flipboard uniquely, with Mike McHugh at the helm, has had a pretty unique point of view about advertising on the platform, and really has, publicly been, saying we want to reform advertising. We want to do it differently. That's shifting, and I think 3 years ago, really building out the programmatic offering there.
It's a great dream.
It's a great dream.
It's challenging to do custom and cool stuff in programmatic, though.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because I'll try not to ramble here, but even it goes back to the balance between I think the need for engineering to drive the business, because all of your businesses depend on the consumer experience first, but they also are dependent on the realities of the revenue coming into source and fund the engineering practice and the progress there. So anyway, I wanted to just start by grounding everyone, and maybe you could take a minute and talk about how each of your businesses makes money. What are the primary sources of revenue, and maybe even how that's changed in recent times.
Wonderful. I'll lead off. So right now, if you look at all the ways WeatherBug makes money, I'm going to break some of the advertising chunks down, but for the most part, we're like 99% advertising, we're pretty much 100% advertising revenue. The biggest chunk is programmatic. So we have billions of impressions a month at the 320 by 50, 300 by 250 level, all in mobile app, split iOS and Android. But I would say programmatic is probably, I don't know, of dollar amount, at least 60% of our overall business. We then, a year ago, started a content distribution partnership as a publisher for Taboola. We were one of the first mobile apps to do that, and that has been significantly successful for us, and I would say that's close to 25, even 30% of our revenue. And then direct sales for us is interesting, and this is a conversation I love having with these two. Our direct sales team went through some crazy ups and downs. When I inherited it, it was a team that was at 6. 5 were fired the day before I joined, and there was one, and it was like, here, do something with this. And luckily, the one was stellar. He had been doing it for 15 years. He has basically rebuilt the direct sales team, bringing in things like video publishing, like us be able to create custom content, things like that were kind of beyond WeatherBug's reach before. So we've actually seen incredible growth in our direct sales business because of a focus on ad products. So, that's still maybe no more than 10, 15% of bottom line of top line revenue. But that we have seen a significant growth there. We have hired, we have another open head, I would say counter to a lot of what our competitive set is seeing with a decrease in direct sales. Right. We're also working with a smaller number, but it's growing pretty significantly. So that's been awesome. And then the last bucket is data. And we historically have not sold data. Right. And that's a very hot topic in our world. If you look at our competitive set too, AccuWeather got in trouble for some mobile reveal stuff. Weather Channel's getting sued by the city of LA. There's a huge privacy wave coming. and we have to be incredibly tight. And we are incredibly tight, and we have not, to this point, done any of those types of deals. I don't know if we're going to get into that kind of topic today, but that's one of the things that we spend a ton of time thinking about is where do you draw the line of like who owns that and the consumer's relationship. And at the end of the day, we're the ones holding the bag because if someone leaves, that's the ARPU that we don't see. So that's kind of where I would say the growth is on the direct sales side and programmatic and Taboola. Those things are all growing. But that's how they kind of break down. The biggest chunk for us is programmatic.
Can you just explain the Taboola relationship quickly?
Sure. So we're basically just one of the first publishers to use content in stream from, there's that competitive set of Outbrain and Rev Content, et cetera. We pioneered some of their SDK build out with them. So we were one of the first pubs. And it's basically bringing in third-party content and some advertising in stream at the bottom of our scroll. We also monetize differently than a Flipboard where there is a bottom to WeatherBug.
Right.
So versus other infinite feed apps, that was a big opportunity for us. But that's been super successful.
Okay. Cool. Ashley, do you want to?
Yeah, for Reddit, our primary business is through ads. What I meant to say earlier was that the performance products really only started to exist as of January this year, and so my team only really started to exist as of January this year. We released a bunch of products, CPC and everything, and really, although Reddit has existed for about 13, 14 years, our ads business has only really come up, especially in the performance side over the last few years. So that's our primary revenue stream. And then we are trying to diversify a bit. I'm not sure if people are familiar with Reddit coins, but we're definitely putting some effort into Reddit coins. And also in July, we released community awards. And then obviously there's Reddit Premium, which is for users who don't want to see ads. But I don't know why you wouldn't want to see Reddit ads. They're really cool.
How much does that cost?
The coins?
No. Well, I would love to learn a little bit more about the economics of the coins, but how much does it cost to be an unpaid or a non-ad Reddit subscriber? Do you know what that subscription rate is?
$5.99 a month.
Okay.
I just checked before I came here.
Good for you. That's incredible.
When you saw the revenue diversification point, you were like, all right, maybe I should look into this. I did the same thing.
Did my research.
Checked into what our setup was, but similar to both of them, we're largely advertising based, right? It's probably about 90% of our revenue at this point. We have diversified a little bit recently, and we do have an e-commerce business. A lot of people come to Flipboard. It's passion-based, it's interest-based, right? When you're in Flipboard and you set up your personalized feed, it's what are you interested in and then what are the subcategories you're interested in, right? Like I'm interested in technology, but specifically cryptocurrency and drones, right? So because of that specificity, I guess, there is chatter in the social aspect of Flipboard, and there are opportunities for e-commerce. So we're trying to grow that business, but we are largely ad-based. I'll break it down like Mike did of the advertising business. When I started about 3 years ago, we were 90% insertion order based, direct sales, and 10% through Facebook Audience Network. We've diversified since then. We have Rubicon, Google, Amazon, the usual suspects of monetization partners, some mobile specific ones, MoPub, InMobi, trying to strike a balance between having every single ad tech partner out there and, being wholly reliant on Google, somewhere in the middle, right? All the partners with unique demand, I think we've kind of struck a relationship with at this point. Again, we started 90-10. We're probably almost 50-50 at this point, insertion order versus programmatic. So in 3 years, a lot has changed. Our sales team went from probably 20 people globally to about 8 at this point. So we are relying a bit more on the open exchange, indirect relationships, curated marketplaces, all that kind of stuff. So there is a changing in the tide going on with us. We are looking at data. It's a tricky subject, just like with anyone else. With us, it's more about, what's the value of it, right? Like as a publisher, what's the value of knowing what somebody read? With us, we think it's a little deeper because we have those 3,000 different publishers working with us. So I can say, this is what you read across 500 different titles as opposed to one specific title. So we know there's value in the data. The question is, when you talk to an agency holding company and they say, give me your data, It's the same answer I had when I was at Condé Nast, right? It's, well, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to pay me for it? And how am I going to get it over to you, right? Connection-wise. So the data thing is still a little bit of a question mark. We work with Oracle Data Cloud, Blue Kai, LiveRamp, the usual suspects for targeting on our platform. Now the question is, can we make that data portable and make money off of it? So that's another thing we're kind of toying with. But obviously GDPR and CCPA are big on our minds. I moderated, well, I didn't moderate, I participated. I refused to moderate on this one, on privacy at a conference recently. Super exciting topic, but good attendance. It seemed like everyone, this is a hot topic, the whole privacy thing, but.
Everyone's scared.
Yeah.
Everyone's watching. So
Yeah, the IAB just had an event yesterday on it. But yeah, we're 90% advertising, 10% e-com. We're considering a premium version. We're toying with it, right? But.
Can I make a suggestion there? Because there's one thing I actually wanted to get to that I missed about WeatherBug, a huge mistake that we made. So we have always pretty much, the web presence was founded in 2000. So it's been around for 19 years. We didn't really have a paid product or a subscription product until a couple years ago. And we started by just putting a paid product in the store. Huge mistake. I cannot think of a reason today why you would create a paid app and not a subscription app, but we have an incredible amount of technical debt today because of that decision. So if you're at this position, and I hope I didn't cut off one of the
No,
future
it's great.
questions.
It is, but it's okay.
Yeah, I think that as we're looking at what our setup looks like, still the vast majority is coming through advertising. But we have these folks. We literally made our paid app. We put it up to $20 in the store to get people to stop buying, and they haven't. So we still have a problem to fix.
right.
Well, I guess that's not. There's still some opportunity there, I guess. But to understand the subscription business right now, we have to continue building for people who gave us $5 once, and that is frustrating for a tech team. So I would say focusing on a subscription over
The lifetime value still doesn't work, is
Right.
what you're saying. Got
Yeah.
it.
Right. Well, the LTV doesn't work, but also it's really hard to motivate a team to help a user who is never going to make you a dime for the rest of their lives.
Interesting.
It's a good one. Actually, when Jesse from Jump Ramp was up here earlier, he mentioned monetizing users. There's a pretty strict rule apparently at Jump Ramp, which is the D30. If you can't get to a positive ROAD after 30 days, if the user's not paid for what it costed you to acquire them, then that's not a good thing. Is there a model that you guys use? Like, how long did it take WeatherBug to realize, we shouldn't have invested all that money in that pay once app? It should have been a subscription model. Is there something that you guys do to evaluate good revenue versus bad revenue?
It's like partnership and risk. I would say one of the places WeatherBug has excelled in the past year or so has been the partnership side, where we sit down and have serious, deep conversations about things like privacy. If we're talking about user acquisition, yes, we have a formula. We're very lucky in that we monetize really well, and as a weather app, our cost of acquisition is really low. So as opposed to if there are folks in this room, and I know Jesse's one of them, doing user acquisition over things like games, that margin's really tight. Yeah. Lucky for us, it's looser. Again, more opportunity. But yes, it's the cost of acquisition versus lifetime value. And I think one of the downsides is people have a very good understanding of that on the user acquisition side, not so much on the pub side. So pubs don't understand as much how much individual users are making for them, which is something I think is going to change. But I think when we look at partnerships, it's about long-term risk and someone that we see as being a part of our business in 5 years.
Okay.
User acquisition and.
I mean,
formulas?
so we have one user acquisition person in San Francisco. We definitely have an LTV model. It's not my team and not really my wheelhouse anymore.
You happen to have a little bit of experience on it elsewhere, though.
A little bit.
Yeah.
What are you referring to?
Well, you were running user acquisition for Uber, et cetera, and a lot of big folks at through Fetch, and you have I mean, you have been a resource for me over my mobile career on exactly that equation. So not sure if you didn't want to talk about it here, and sorry to blow up your spot in front of everyone.
Thanks for that.
But that math I know is super important, and you taught most of it to me. That's why.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I think in my previous life, I was at an agency. I was on the buy side, and a lot of what we were trying to do there was obviously, again, measure post-install metrics, measure subscriptions, measure first trips. A lot of what we saw there was that we needed to measure incrementality. So I think something that I'm really interested in the UA side is how people measure incrementality versus specific ad dollar against a metric. I think that's a hot topic for next year.
I think we could do a much better job of it. Not to knock our UA guy out west. He's got his hands full, particularly with competition, right? Like, it's no secret that Apple News, Google has a product. There's a Chinese company that launched a product called Smart News. So we're facing increased competition, right? And we're facing, challenges with publishers, a few years ago, not as much anymore, but saying, hey, I distribute my content through Facebook, or I distribute my content elsewhere. So, we're not as, invincible, I would say, as Flipboard once was, 7 years ago or 6 years ago. So the user acquisition guy has his hands full with trying to, keep our user base steady. Again, we have over 100 million users globally, which is awesome. So there's a lot of people using the app. But we do rely on some strategic partnerships pretty heavily, right? Like, Samsung distributes our app. So there's something called briefing in Samsung, which is effectively like Apple News. It comes pre-packaged or bundled with your Samsung device, and that is powered by Flipboard, and that's a huge percentage of our users. So, stuff like that. We don't do user acquisition, which people can't wrap their heads around when I talk to people in the mobile space, right? Like, I have so many vendors coming to me saying, I can drive users for Flipboard. I'm like, that's great. I don't have budget for that, and I don't do that. So,
Right.
But evaluating the value of our users is something that they've done on the direct IO side, and in programmatic, I've noticed conflicting trends actually. So the users that it's kind of like a Condé Nast, right? There's a stickiness to a user, and explain to someone who's in leadership that, hey, the users that spend the most time on the app are actually the least valuable in programmatic. The people who are 30 minutes deep into their session, I can't freaking monetize them. I don't really have much interest in those users. And they will say that those are our best users, but from my perspective, our briefing Samsung users who see 2 ads are my most valuable users, because people will bid a lot more on that first impression or earlier session. So there's kind of some weird contradictions that seem a little bit like, I don't know, just strange.
Yeah, it's a good segue, I think. The question I have is, where do you invest in revenue growth? Is it new users to grow the scale of the opportunity? Is it, for Flipboard, it sounds like it's not driving deeper engagement and more time in the app necessarily on a user level, but there's also Mike, we talked about internationalization. It's a tough one. When we spoke, I know you guys are dealing with this sort of international expansion as well. You mentioned smart news in China. So where do you invest in finding opportunities to create more revenue coming into the company?
So I would actually say, depending on where you are in your app lifecycle, tools are incredibly important. So if you are not looking at your app store optimization, you need to be. If you're not looking at product analytics, you should be. If you're not looking at in-app messaging and mobile marketing automation and those types of tools, those were, I think when I got to WeatherBug, I had this vision that is all about dumping money into UA, and I ran the preload business at Verizon beforehand, and I can get us a great deal, and let's just go. And what I realized is I think everyone underestimates how big the hole is in their bucket, right? Because it's about filling up the bucket, and it's about the bucket falling out is you don't do a good enough job of retention.
I use a leaky bucket all the time. That's why I'm smiling.
So like I think our bucket was much leakier than we thought. So I would say taking a good holistic view of both your user acquisition metrics and your retention metrics is the only way to really be successful. And for us, we spent a lot more time and money shoring those up, and we have seen significant growth because of that.
Yeah, I would definitely echo the tools side. I think from the performance advertising side with Reddit, I can definitely see next year that we're going to be able to grow our business when we get some table stakes items, honestly, that we don't currently have. Like at the minute, we don't have postbacks, which is kind of a big deal for app install advertisers. So I think our main growth for our team specifically is going to be getting a lot of these products and really refining the kind of tools that we have and the products that we have. For the Reddit side, in terms of users, I think there's a lot of things that they're trying to do, a bunch of different product features. We released the Reddit Public Access Network, which users are going crazy over, which is really exciting. So I think really trying to grow both sides of it at the same time is going to be key for our success.
Cool. I just want to, can you explain postbacks? Because I don't know if everyone knows what that is.
Oh man, sorry, not speaking.
I don't know, maybe everybody does, but it's
so we have integrations with all of the mobile measurement partners. And at the minute, if you're in the Reddit ads dashboard, you can see impressions and clicks, but you can't see anything past that. So we're working with all of the mobile measurement partners to ensure that you can see installs and post-install metrics within our dashboard, and then we'll build auto-optimization tools to make sure that we're getting to the right metric that our DR advertisers want.
It's challenging. That's what stops a lot of people from spending in app, right? That I've found over time. I get a lot of brands that say like, well, I can only measure this deep and app doesn't drive X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, it does drive X, Y, and Z. You just can't attribute it to me, which is extremely frustrating. So
and people are lazy. People are lazy. If they don't see it in the dashboard, they don't think it does anything. The amount of times that we have to speak to clients and say, can you please just look at your data, like come back to us? And they're like, oh, wow,
Find
you guys
all the
are
ones
performing
that don't
really
have a name
well.
associated with it. I drove those. Yeah, so we have that challenge a lot. And on the branding side as well, it's not just performance-based, right? It's not just install-based, but it can be a lot of other metrics that are incompatible with mobile app, which is frustrating because time spent in mobile app is here, and dollars are here, and dollars are here because advertisers and agencies say they can't properly measure it. And that's just like the most frustrating thing because the users are there, it's the right users, it does perform, you just can't track it. That's more frustrating than if it didn't perform. You know what I mean? So anyway, sorry, I digress. But as far as like a growth perspective, one of the things Flipboard didn't do years ago was make sure that it was interacting with the rest of the ecosystem. And we had a strategic relationship with Twitter. Our CEO was on the board. So your people's Twitter posts could fall into your Flipboard feed, which was cute and interesting, but not necessarily a needle mover. What we were lacking was kind of like shareability, I guess. So when you take an article that you found on Flipboard and you share it to your friends, it would force them to try and download the app. And this was a little bit of a frustrating user experience if you just wanted to view that particular individual article. So you see that with Yelp and Pinterest, right? When someone would send something to you, if you didn't have Yelp or Pinterest, it would force you into the store, which is not a great UX. So we're willing now to let people view Flipboard articles on desktop or mobile web. With that, we want shareability, right? So you can actually, on a lot of our publisher partner sites, there's now a Flipboard button alongside Pinterest, Twitter, and all those others, which sounds small, but it's huge, right? Is the fact that the little Flipboard logo is now on all of these different publishers' sites. It makes us more relevant and so on and so forth. But yeah, these network effects is what our growth guy is calling them. The ability for you to share something properly now, and then that person shares it, and the whole snowball kind of thing is our strategy for the next couple of years. If it works, we're going to grow exponentially. Yeah. If it doesn't, our user growth guy will just, we'll just be like, well, he's crazy. I don't know.
Was the structure of that sharing experience driven by the revenue structure for the company, the monetization model at the time when that was happening. So it was a social aggregator was really how Flipboard was built. The revenue, I think, in the beginning was really driven by rev share deals with the publishers that were showing.
You know Flipboard very well.
I know a thing or two.
Yeah.
But so, it seems like that model would have been driven by the structure. Maybe technically they couldn't tie back the share to a mobile web experience if they were pushing users there versus.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
So there was a method to the madness. There were reasons why we made some of these decisions, and that was one of them. So this segues into did our business models change over the last few years? So Flipboard's model has changed. When I joined, you would click on an article, and then you would stay within Flipboard, and it would still flip like our animation, and we would kick a rev share to every single publisher. And we built a homegrown ad server and all this craziness to manage all of these individual rev shares. No offense to publishers, but let's be honest. When you're talking to a Condé versus a Hearst, they want different rev shares. They want different terms. Right. So you have to negotiate these with every single one, which is insane. I'm shocked that they were able to do this at the company before I got here. And then they got to a point where publishers said, hey, the rev share isn't enough. I want you to drive traffic to my mobile website. So we actually shifted the way the system works. When you click on an article, Flipboard essentially becomes a browser in that instance, and it's a mobile web rendering of their page, and therefore ads from their server. So it's just showing that we send them a ton of traffic. So we've actually become the #4 referral source for most publishers. We trade off with Twitter sometimes, so it's obviously Google search, then Facebook, then Twitter, then us right behind them. So that's definitely like a feather in our hat kind of thing. I think it's a nice pat on the back how much we drive traffic-wise to publishers. But the model has changed, right? And so now we're more shareable, we're more friendly with the rest of the ecosystem. And again, I have the home feeds and the categorical feeds as my inventory. When you click into an article, that's their inventory, if that makes sense.
Do you monetize that frame? Or is it just like you just get a rev share back from them on whatever happens?
So we don't get a rev share back from them at all.
Okay.
It's kind of a cost of doing business with them. We get to run their content. So it's like, thank you very much.
That's instead of the fee?
So we used to sell all the inventory. We would kick them a rev share. Now they get to run their own ads. We run our own ads, and that's that, right? And it's just a traffic. We're sending them a ton of traffic, so they're happy with us. So it's an alternative to Facebook.
Same question to you guys. Mike hit it because I sent the questions ahead of time. But has the model changed for WeatherBug or for Reddit in the past 3 to 5 years? I think we talked. The performance model is really very new for Reddit.
Yeah, I mean, whilst Reddit again has been around for about 13 years, our performance product CPC has only really existed. Our integrations with the mobile measurement partners have only really existed for the last year or so. Prior to this, we definitely had big brand partnerships. So we still have a brand team who looks after the AMAs and the splashy takeovers and the homepage takeovers and all of that kind of stuff. And then we now have a self-serve team who looks after all of the kind of smaller advertisers who want to go into the dashboard and do their own thing. But then, yeah, definitely the changes in the way that we sell ads and the promoted posts and the CPC model has increased the way that we do business, I think, for sure. I remember literally about 5 years ago trying to buy ads on Reddit for Supercell, and it was like a post that was like a regular post on Reddit, and I had a MMP link in there, but it didn't work, and it was crazy.
Well, they were also scared about the user backlash, right?
Yeah.
I think that's one thing we have in common is Flipboard was very custom, and we were all sponsorships, and now we're more of a barbell. I think the Tim Armstrong thing.
Yeah, cool. I would say we're still pretty scared about user.
Yeah,
about
Reddit users are an intense group. That's my little brother.
I think we're nearing the end of time here. Are we there? Q&A or we're done? Q&A. Okay. I have a lot more questions. I want to make sure you guys are getting your questions answered. Anyone have anything that they want to ask these guys?
Hi, this is Abi with Verizon. As we know, the cost per install is increasing. It's now $4 or $5, per install. How do you spread your budgets from, user acquisition versus user retention?
You do a deal with Samsung.
Yeah, we have a huge distribution deal with Samsung and one with T-Mobile. That's my growth strategy. You guys can take this one.
I would say it's not as I wouldn't look at it as a budget allocation, but more as like a resource allocation for us, because more of the retention pieces are tools. So when you have somebody who is learning how to work within a mobile marketing automation tool and understanding how push can interact, that is incredibly valuable. UA, once you have the basis down, like you have your mobile marketing partner there and you have your, Tune, Coachava just already integrated, then you can spend. For us, I would say at the end of the day, resource-wise, it's about 60-40 UA to retention, but from a dollar spent, it's probably like 90-10 for UA, because most of the dollars go into via tools for the app. We also haven't had our cost. We don't actually buy on Facebook, and we buy very little on Google, and we buy a lot. So we have been very good at finding sources outside of those. We have not seen an increase in CPI, but I know everyone else has, because CPMs on Facebook have gone up and CPMs on a lot of those big folks have. So I would also say there's probably a couple buckets that are available to you outside of the major sources that can be very, very lucrative, and that other people aren't up here talking on stage about. I honestly think Reddit is one of them. I think there are dozens of those opportunities out there, but it's about getting creative and asking people honestly, as we're getting coffee, like, what have you tried that's awesome, and what have you tried that sucks? And that is really what drives a lot of ours.
Should I just talk to you later?
Yeah, please. No, I would love to, because we are very happy with the sources we use, and I think it's about going where everybody else isn't.
Do we have another question?
Aaron Schatz, Power Inbox. I have a question that was really focused on when Weatherbug specifically mentioned that buying the application outright is not as valuable. Do you see almost the entire ecosystem moving to just a monetization instead of like an outright purchase for a lot of things, like in general?
Yeah, I mean, when I think of some of the leading data scientists doing what we're doing, they're focusing on subscription monetization. So I think that advertising is a great business, and it's huge, and it leads you down a good partnership path. But I think there are obvious headwinds in advertising that, we think about as an executive team all the time, like, what happens if GDPR or CCPA goes much worse than we expect? What are the other things available to us? So for us, we have all of our focus on advertising right now. I think over the next year, we're going to see, you're going to see a BD head on my team focus specifically on the subscription piece, and that's just like really hardcore calculus. But once you get there, that revenue stream is much more valuable than advertising.
It also seems much more predictable, consumer behavior versus advertiser behavior.
Yeah,
That's it.
exactly.
Okay, I think we are wrapping up. Thank you all. Thank you guys so much. I hope this was valuable for the group here.
Great job.
And thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for moderating.
Advisors. Please join me in welcoming Amanda and her panel.
Great, thank you for having us. So just to kick it off, I think first I'll introduce myself, Amanda Martin, Goodway Group. I head partnerships, but more importantly, I'll pass it to Jordan to introduce himself.
Sure. I'm Jordan Green. I head up the mobile advisory group for Mela Media. I've accidentally been in the mobile world for 21 years now. Wasn't even called mobile when I started. It was wireless, and that stunk. But a lot of the faces that you recognize in the room, like Mike and I, go back a long way. But we've been acquiring users for clients ranging from the Knicks and the Rangers to IDT Telecom to Publishers Clearinghouse, and building out full strategies for them for years now. And there's enough of the good and enough of the bad that clients should be doing this now in smarter ways than they have been for the last couple of years.
Simon?
Hi, everyone. I'm a little bit of an interloper. My name is Simon Assad, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Heavy.com. We're not in the in-app business, but we're hoping to get into it. But we have a fairly significant amount of experience acquiring and growing customers through the mobile web world, and we are expanding that into and driving those customers to app. We've grown from 1 million to 35 million organically through the strength of content and distribution partnerships, and we think there's opportunity to expand that to mobile apps. So we're here to hopefully provide some information and learn a little bit.
Yeah, and so the way we're going to kind of position today's panel is from someone who's looking to get into the path to in-app conversion, and someone who has been here since wireless. So, Simon, from your standpoint, as a company that's been able to drive to nearly 40 million unique users on the web on a monthly basis, what has maybe held you back, or what promise do you see when approaching developing an in-app strategy?
I mean, I think the first thing is having the customers. So a lot of what I heard on the last panel, which I thought was an excellent panel, by the way, was about how challenging it is and what it costs to get new customers to install your app. And I think Jordan has a particularly interesting point of view on how much fraud there is and the kind of shenanigans that's involved in getting somebody to convert and whether it's a real person or not. On the web, through the strength of content, it's relatively simple to identify whether somebody is real or not, and to convey that into an app world is something that we're very interested in. But it sounds like it's quite complex, and so I think that's what we think is kind of interesting, and what we're here to learn about is how do you take that large customer base, 35, 40 million people a month, and how do you get them to download a heavy app? And what's that worth to us if they're on the mobile web and on the app? What's the difference between those two things? Because it sounded like from what the fella from Flipboard said is that there's a big gap between the monetization for web versus in-app as well, which I also thought was very interesting.
And so, Jordan, do you find that when clients start working with you in this process to pave a path to conversion for mobile in-app, that they're sitting in a similar position that Simon is, or kind of from your experience, kind of where's the starting point for most?
It's easy to end up in the weeds really fast. So, hope you don't mind, I'm going to use Simon's. We're going to take the heavy.com app. Okay, let's use that as our example.
Great.
One of the very basic things you need to have, table stakes, is you need to have a mobile measurement platform. MMP, you hear it thrown around. Here's what that means. It's app acquisition analytics. It lets you track anybody who's going to install your app. And install does not mean download. It's two different things. The download is the process that goes through Google Play and iTunes. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you can't. But the trackability component happens when that user opens the app for the first time. That's what, again, referred to as an install. That is the first time that you have a real relationship with the customer. You can start seeing their data. So what we're going to do for you, you need to have that MMP component that's built into your app first and foremost. Now, this helps you track organic stuff too. You want to know that you're getting your organic traffic, and we'd love to think that for eternity you're going to have nothing but organic guys coming in. But the reality is that you can't. So you need to go out on the open market and be able to track where you're buying the ads from. And what the MMP allows you to do is a handful of things. It allows you to track the user, let's call it the customer, okay? It's customer acquisition, not user acquisition. I want to know that they clicked on my ad and they installed it and it got matched together. So that's part one. Then part two is that data is then passed back to the partner who created that install for you. What you also want to do then is you also want your registration. You want that to go back to them so then they can optimize towards more registrations. Right. And I'm going to throw a third one in here. We'll call it purchase. And a purchase, you want that also going back. So the ideal customer for you in this situation is we bought an ad that drove to an install, that drove to a registration, that drove to a purchase. And that's an ideal customer that they should optimize towards.
And I assume that the MMP also provides analytics about what that person does as a customer once they've installed?
You can, but here's where you might want to bifurcate. A lot of companies get stuck. They say, we're using Google Analytics. Right. Okay, Google Analytics does not allow you to track the acquisition component. Right. But really good for the behavioral stuff.
Got it. So that's how you split it up.
Yes.
Got it.
Now, you can put all that into the MMP also. However, based upon the models that the guys have set up, you may be paying for that. So you want to kind of keep that as a balance as to what you're looking at.
Fair enough.
So in ad tech, you said that, there's both of you have said there are bad players, there's fraud. We tend to go there. We go there first and foremost. We always go to the negative, everything we have to solve for. From an opportunity standpoint, you talked about that cycle and that success metric. Kind of what is as you look at mobile in-app, what's the positive message that you want brands and publishers to think about first and foremost, instead of dwelling on the whys and what could go wrong?
Sure, and don't worry, we're going to come back to the fraud and the negative in a little bit. But the positive is that an app is an incredibly sticky opportunity to engage a customer on a daily basis. The average consumer is using 6 to 8 apps. The rest of it is stuff that we've collected over time. We may never go back and visit it. But you want to be in the flow of their daily lives, especially for something that's a newsreader. And I'm not trying to minimize.
No. I think it's very interesting. I mean, we've invested in push notifications. We started in January. We've signed up about 1 million people for push since January, and we found it to be. That's why we're interested in app, because push has kind of created the bridge for us, where we've learned that it's an incredibly effective tool at driving kind of awareness and further engagement, especially for a news site. But that's. I think it's very interesting to see that. I assume that would be even more important once you're in the app world, right?
Because that's absolutely the second piece that you need in there. And I'm going to put this out there, even though it dips back into the other panel. There's revenue generation opportunities once you've got push notification in sight as well.
And so I think a lot of times, especially sitting on the agency side of the bench, we're talking to brands a lot about pushing installs. And that's kind of where the conversation tends to focus on from a media activation standpoint. Our brands are not pushing us past that point at this current moment. They're focused on just collecting the downloads. And so how do you get a brand to move past the install and to focus in on the right metrics that truly tie to that ROI, that holy grail of actual revenue?
It sounds terrible, but scare them. Because what they need to recognize is there is a high possibility, if you have anybody that's coming to you and you're running your app, and they're reporting back to you how many installs they've driven for you, you need to be not only leery, but you may want to fire them in the room. And the reason being is because of the fraud that is hiding back here. To put that in context, Forrester projects there's about $20 billion of mobile ad fraud every year. That's a shockingly high number. And if you think that you're immune to it, then you're really missing that. So the key is you don't want to be looking at that first level of that post back, right? You don't want to look at just the install. You're happy to get them in the door, but you need those quality levels. You need the registration. And by the way, the fraudsters are clever. They're going to give you fake registrations too. So you need to keep moving downstream. You want to get it to where you're forcing a real person or a fraudster. They got to put up some money towards you that starts generating value. When you start looking at the real return on investment from end to end, how much was in my marketing budget? How much money did I generate from this? That's when it can get really scary, or it can get really positive because it creates lots of optimization opportunities as well. Well, I'm just going to do this last part.
Yeah.
A lot of companies will spend a lot of time talking about Facebook and Google as their primary places, and those tend to be safer environments. Facebook, we put at the top of that with platinum level targeting, but you're paying platinum level pricing to go along with it too. The MMPs will gladly tell you that they're integrated with over 2,000 mobile ad networks. That's lots of other opportunity out there. That being said, you also need the expertise with which to know which of those 2,000 are the good guys and which ones are the bad guys.
For sure. So going down what ad tech loves to do, go to the fraud and focus on the concerns. What are you seeing as the most prevalent? I think a lot of brands are afraid to kind of peel back and figure out how much of their truth is real and how much of it is inflated metrics that they've been kind of living off of and passing up to the board for a really long time. So what practices are you seeing that brands like Simon and in the room need to be aware of when they're kind of going into, or when they already have an established in-app strategy?
Okay, so let's talk about heavy.com. Okay, we have a new heavy app, and the thing that we want to be careful of, stage one, we don't want empty installs. That's one of our terms that we use often. We don't just want the person who's installed the app, put it on their phone, and then disappeared. Why? Because that could be a legitimate person, but more often than not, What it is one of the phone farms that's being set up overseas that is filled with 10,000 phones or lots of heavy computers that are running as bots. And they're installing your app, they're generating money from their own apps that they own, and then they're pulling money out. By the time that you can catch up with them, often, the fraudsters have stolen 60, 80% of your budget, and that's not, I don't think that's exaggerating. If you're not paying attention, they can do it really easily. So stage one is called an empty install for heavy. Number two, we don't want the fake registrations either. Fraudsters will start recognizing the different data points you want because you're going out in the market with KPIs and you're telling them what to give you. You have to be careful and you just have to be able to monitor it. The question is, with these fraud, how do you prevent against it? Know your data, touch your data, feel it. And if you think that something's wrong, it likely is. And the third one, which I'm not going to go into too much depth because I could spend days on it, is what we refer to as the big spoof. And the big spoof just peels off parts of your app and starts pumping fake data into your MMP, and then you start optimizing on that fake data. And your team is coming back to you, they're really happy, they're really proud, but all they've done is not even generate these people, they've gone just around the whole system, filled your data feeds with complete garbage that you've now optimized and paid for.
And so, although that's scary in the sense of having to really track it, I assume it's checking back to all the different checkpoints that you have to ensure that an install turns into a registered user actually takes action on the app.
Well, that's a big assumption because I'm going to put this out there. Most companies don't. They're very excited about, as you were saying, they're excited to report the install, the download. It is important to be able to monitor these things, and I'll do you one that's even worse, which is the level of ad tech that we're living through right now has done two things. It's allowed the fraudsters to hide in plain sight, and two, they are unwitting accomplices in helping this go down. For example, over the next couple of weeks, all of us are going to go to different ad week shows, and you're going to hear lots of technology pitches, including from mobile ad tech partners. They'll sit up there and they'll tell you about all their fraud prevention tools. Did they think the audience is filled with just good guys? They're going in and doing their sales pitches, doing the same thing. They're giving the playbook on how to defeat them to the fraudsters. As an individual brand, Heavy, we're going to create Heavy's own prevention guide. Your job is not to fix the industry. Your job is to protect yourself.
So let me ask you a question. We deliver a lot of customers to our partners on the commerce and OTT side. You know, a couple of million to commerce sites, a couple of 100,000 subscribers to OTT applications, but it's all done through content. How much is content driving app installs a part of the conversation? And is there fraud in that as well?
Well, now it'd be on your platform, so you can control those guys.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, we obviously are creating the content and it's driving significant scale. We're hoping to like replicate that for our own kind of organic apps. But is there a marketplace for content driving app installs outside the construct of what we're discussing?
Here's where companies get themselves in trouble in that regard.
Right.
Is they start looking for more scale. That they
Yeah,
can
no,
start
scale's the
driving.
question, right? Is there enough scale against it?
So if you start going out and bringing in alternative networks to start filling your feeds with stuff to background revenue,
Right.
that's when you get yourself in trouble.
Got it.
Just and by the way, nobody's immune. Facebook recently sued 2 Chinese companies that were in their audience network because they were feeding fraud in, CPI fraud into there.
Right.
So that's have to be careful.
Yeah, no, we don't run any ads around that content. It's primarily set up to like drive customers without that construct. Anyway.
Because most of your revenue is driven on a direct relationship.
Right,
in that
exactly.
regard. So
Yeah.
in that regard, you should be safer.
Right.
But you still have to be on, vigilant.
Yeah.
So Simon, you're sitting in an interesting seat where you've been driving in-app conversions, but not necessarily to your own apps.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't charge. So we drive about 400,000 OTT paid subscribers a year. And then a couple of million to Amazon and various other commerce sites. And we only get paid based on someone actually making a purchase. But we found that to be very lucrative when you connect a customer with what they actually want. So there's no disruption that's required to drive the transaction. It's purely like putting somebody together with a product that they're actually looking for. which we've found to be kind of fraud-free, at least from our side anyway.
And so as Jordan kind of walks through some of the fraudulent conversions.
Scary stuff, by the way.
Yeah. Was that on your radar? Was that on your radar?
No, I had no idea. Getting a good education here. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that that's the important part, to find partners that are going to talk you through the good, bad, and indifferent, and not just focus on the shiny metrics that most are focused on.
The shiny stuff's good too, but don't take your head and stick it in the sand. So we're talking about building your app from scratch here. So when you talk about that, you can put preventative measures right up front. Sure. Fraudsters are still going to catch up. It's a cat and you have to constantly keep staying one step ahead of them. And I always use the metaphor of it's like the dam has got a hole in it. You stick your finger in it and another hole is going to pop. So for people that have existing apps and existing programs, it's not too late. You don't throw in the towel. But a lot of companies, all of a sudden, they get scared and they shut down their customer acquisition programs altogether. That's not the way to go. The key to what you want to be able to do is start doing a live audit of your data, digging into that MMP data, and digging into your internal databases, and making sure that the data looks like they should go together. When they don't, that's when you're really in trouble. But at the same time, what you don't want to be able to do is you don't want to sit there and say, we're just going to keep going as we are because look at all this stuff that we've been able to generate. For as efficient as you think you are, you could be doing a lot better. I'll give you a real case. For one client, we went in and they had been spending money on one platform for a good amount of time. And by just digging into those two databases, the MMP database and their own internal database, we were able to identify real flaws that were missing. And within about, I want to say it was within about a 4-week period, we were able to cut their CPAs on that one particular platform, which was on its way out, by about 2/3. By kicking out fraud and be able on the stuff that you can just identify, you're never going to get completely clean. Which, by the way, is another place that you should strive to get there, sure, but you can't actually get there unless 100% of your traffic's organic, and then you're not spending anything on acquisition.
So another thing that I think focusing on the conversion or getting to the revenue is important, but I think the value of what you're capturing as an app, the consumer information, that first party relationship that you have with that consumer, especially in the world where, we're based on cookies right now on the web and working towards other solutions. I think brands have such an opportunity to leverage their mobile apps to build their first party database as long as it's not garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, I'm sorry to be the garbage guy in this. I agree with you because they become so reliant on that data, as they should be. It's first-party consumer data. I just acquired this. But if it's on bad stuff, you could actually, this is where the 20 billion number can become compounded very quickly. What if you're starting to make your service set and product development decisions based on this data that you're getting back, but it's being filled by factories in Vietnam and Singapore that are just filling it with their they VPN'd in and they look like customers from Indiana and Kentucky and California, but that's not geo-data, it's geo-garbage. But you start making decisions based on this. If you can't start identifying that you have fraud, then you're in big trouble. And the mechanisms that you need to put in place to solve your own problems are important, because otherwise you're looking at a compounded thing that you may not recognize till down the road. Time is one of those factors that truly works in the fraudster's favor.
Is there a point of scale that a brand kind of needs to pass a threshold to start digging into this, or is this day one table stakes?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say 99% of all companies that are buying mobile ads right now, I have some fraud being infected on them right now.
No matter scale.
It doesn't matter scale. All scale does is create a really big target on your back. And once you have a big target, it used to be click fraud, which was something that we heard about for so long. What click fraud is a massive approach to an industry. What mobile fraud is people going after your campaign specifically. And the more money you spend, the bigger a target you are.
So Simon, you excited?
Sorry, I heard a moan from everyone.
You excited to get going on this project?
Can't wait.
So I think probably a good time to open up to Q&A if anyone has any questions for the panelists.
Yeah, Amanda, you mentioned the kind of the reluctance of brands with agencies to want to go past the place the ad. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the focus is always kind of on vanity metrics, and so we've gotten our C-suites addicted to metrics that don't necessarily tie back to your true ROI, and so installs are the clicks, of web browsing. And so for us, we're always trying to push a client past that. But to your point, it means that we need to get in far deeper into their data set to do that because we can't see it externally. And so if you don't have a brand who's digging into their own data, then you're not necessarily going to push them past the install. So we can run a campaign for you all day long and push installs, but you're not going to get to the holy grail of that revenue ROI opportunity unless you're willing to work with a partner and dig in deep.
So how do you get them past that?
I think it's starting to actually show them the disconnect between what the installs are or are not doing. It's also having them pause or stop what they're doing and seeing if it actually affects their bottom line and changes things. And so once you get them to understand that they're not measuring the right actions, you can tie it back to revenue pretty quickly, but you have to be having, a far more integrated conversation, potentially past just the marketing department. You need to be also talking to the CFO and really understanding what metrics they're trying to move.
Great. Other questions? Okay, great job. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you,
Thanks,
panel. Well, now that you've been scared to death about fraud, retail and direct marketing industry, his practice includes advertising online and catalog retailers in areas crucial to their businesses, including regulatory compliance, website accessibility, data privacy, and security. Please join me in welcoming Nat.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Chuck. So as Chuck mentioned, I am an attorney. And my firm, Brandon Isaacson, has had a long relationship, starting with the catalog industry and then moving into the online space and mobile. And so we've been on a journey with our clients in data marketing over several generations of technology. So this topic of privacy has been mentioned in a number of the panels so far today, and it really is a major issue in marketing. As you see, it's in the news all over the place, from issues about collection of data about children. We have data breach issues with the Equifax breach or the Capital One breach. Data usage, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, that really was one of the reasons that we have the CCPA today was because of the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And then this one, the bottom one, is one of my favorites. I just saw last week that the University of Alabama has a mobile app which tracks a student's location in the student fan section because the head coach was upset that students were leaving before the end of the game during a blowout, didn't want to be sitting in the sun in 100-degree heat. And so if you stay in this section long enough, you get a better chance of getting tickets to the games that matter. So there's been some uncertainty about that. And so with all of this in the news about privacy, we're also seeing a lot more regulation. I don't have the GDPR up here. Obviously, that was a big groundbreaking regulation that came first. We now have California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA. Nevada and Maine have just enacted new laws. New York has a new data breach law, and there's discussion in New York about a new data privacy law that would be similar to the CCPA in New York State and wouldn't have some of the carve-outs that the CCPA has. So this is, legal regulation is here, more is coming. And then there's always the danger of being sued under existing laws. There are biometric privacy laws. Google was sued over Street View. That was a case under the state wiretapping laws. So Google was collecting Wi-Fi data as they drove by in the Street View car, and they were sued in California about that. So we have being hit on all sides with privacy regulation and laws. What I'd like to do today is sort of give first a brief overview about privacy law, what it is, where it comes from, what some of the themes are, and then drill down and focus more on the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, which is coming into effect on January 1st, 2020. And then after that, open it up for Q&A. So up until the CCPA, which was the first comprehensive online privacy act in the United States, privacy law in the US has been a real patchwork. We have
certain sectors have had privacy regulations, but they haven't had a single overarching law. We have the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act that governs the collection of data about children. That can be an issue for apps, particularly gaming apps and any type of app that may be used by kids. Very strict requirements about getting parental consent before collecting children's data. Email is regulated at the federal level. People who are sending texts and SMS messages have to be concerned about the Telephone Consumer Protection Act that requires you have written affirmative consent before sending a text message, a commercial text. And then the FTC has been involved in terms of enforcing privacy policies. So if you say that you're not going to do something with data and then you do something with data, the FTC views that as an unfair and deceptive trade practice and will investigate. At the state level, we have unfair competition laws, the wiretap laws that I mentioned, and every state has some form of a breach notification law. If you have a data incident, there's an obligation to alert consumers that their data has been compromised. So we've all gotten those because we've had enough major data breaches. Every one of us has probably been notified more than once that our data has been breached. And then I mentioned the sort of the private attorney general concept where individual attorneys and representing plaintiffs will sue a company for privacy violations. When I think about privacy law and regulation with my clients, I look at it in terms of different types of themes. First, there are the privacy practices. What do you do? Next is transparency. What do you tell people about what you do? How do you communicate that to them? Then security. How do you protect data? Because I think that we talk a lot about the challenges with CCPA about restrictions on use of data. How do you honor people's choices? But some of the biggest risk is if you have data that was not properly protected or somehow fell into the wrong hands, there's a great risk of litigation and not to mention the damage to your reputation if you have a security incident. And then I think about choices. Can people tell you about what they want you to do with their data? In the privacy practices theme, I explained it here, we have, this is really just how are you using the data? And up until the CCPA, really, the rule in the United States was largely, if you tell people you're doing it, you can do it. There wasn't a great deal of restriction outside of certain protected categories. Health information, banking information, for universities and schools, student information. That is starting to change. Transparency, this is the big one in terms of your privacy policies. It continues to be the case that the most crucial thing you can do is communicate in your privacy policy to your customers how you're collecting information, who you're sharing that information with, how it's used, and what choices they have. The things that people have been getting into real trouble for are when they say, we will not do this, we'll never sell your information, we'll never share your information, we don't collect this type of information. And then it turns out that they were doing the thing they said they wouldn't do. That's a problem. So many of those practices, had they been properly disclosed, would not have gotten a company into trouble. And then with security, this is a very crucial aspect for anyone dealing in data, and particularly when you're talking about apps, the kind of data that it is possible to collect is so intimate and so personal that security becomes even more important. Depending on the type of data that comes out in a data breach, that will certainly impact the risk that you have and the exposure. There are also anyone that accepts payment already has security requirements to the PCI data security standards, and it's important to have in place a plan for what happens if and when there is some type of a data incident. That could be a breach, like we saw with Equifax. It could be something inadvertent. You send something to a vendor, but you get the wrong email address. It auto-completes, and then the horse is out of the barn. And so you need to be able to notify consumers under those data breach notification acts. You need to be able to notify state regulators if necessary. You need to have a plan in place that you can activate quickly So you're not scrambling to think about how to respond when time is really of the essence. And then consumer choice, these are the choices that you give to consumers. This is the place where the CCPA is really going to change the game, and people really need to start thinking about how to provide choice, how to notify consumers of their choices, and how to honor those choices when they're exercised. I think it's already quite standard to provide customers with an ability to opt out of things like behavioral advertising, but that is going to become an actual legal right in California and very soon across the country. When you think about apps in particular, what makes apps unique? We've talked a lot this morning about the increased engagement that you get through apps, and that has to do with the personal nature of the way people use their devices. It creates risks in terms of you may find yourself with access to the kinds of information that people are particularly sensitive about. People may be surprised that certain kinds of information are being shared. I think Mike mentioned that the Weather Channel was getting sued, has been sued by the city of Los Angeles. The Weather Channel app always disclosed that they were using location data, and they were using location data to deliver forecasts. But they did not disclose that they were using location data for targeting ads, and that's my understanding of that lawsuit. And so the location is very sensitive. Where was I at a particular time on a certain day? So people are really going to be focused on that. I think that that's going to be an issue for more and more apps going forward, because part of what makes an app experience so valuable is the ability to personalize it and the ability to personalize the messages and ad messages that people receive. So if it's surprising to people the way that the data is being collected and used, and then particularly if it's contrary to the privacy policy, that's going to be a big problem. But there also are opportunities. When someone downloads an app, they get shown terms and conditions that they can agree to. And so you have the ability, when you're using apps, to have opt-in to a lot of practices. And that is a very powerful thing. It's really sort of the gold standard if you can opt people into something. And you can opt them into terms and conditions, including, in some cases, dispute resolution provisions. Moving on, this is sort of the meat of our conversation this morning, the CCPA. This is, as I mentioned, the first comprehensive privacy law in the United States. The story behind the CCPA is it was originally written by an advocacy group. It was a little bit stricter than the Privacy Act that has been passed. And this group collected enough signatures to get the CCPA on the ballot as a ballot initiative in California. In California, if you pass something by ballot initiative, you basically can no longer change it. You need a 2/3 majority vote to repeal or amend a ballot initiative. So the California legislature, in order to retain some control over what California law was going to look like, ended up passing the CCPA in about 36 hours, right at the end of the legislative session a year ago. No one had really read it. And so it happened in a hurry, became law, and then we have spent the past year, since that was passed, trying to work out what the final law will look like. There has been a series of amendments, although most of them really did not make significant changes. The California legislative session just ended last Friday. So that's how we got to the CCPA, and it's not the most comforting story for people who are going to be subject to it. The way breaking this down into the 4 themes I talked about, the way that the California Consumer Privacy Act hits all of these is with privacy practices, it focuses on sale of data, consumer opt-out rights. There are specific requirements of what you disclose, when, and how. There is a private right of action. So an individual California customer can sue a company in the event of a data breach for actual damages caused by a sort of a negligent failure to maintain adequate security protocols. There is not a private right of action for a failure to provide the correct disclosure requirements. That was something that had been pushed for, and that's a good news story for app developers. But there are a series of new consumer choices, data rights for California customers, and we'll talk about those in some depth here. So the law goes into effect this January, January 1st, coming right up. The purpose of the law is to protect consumer privacy. The law itself mentions the Cambridge Analytica scandal. There is a real desire on the part of the legislature to give people more control, more understanding of what data is collected about them, how it's used, and more control over it. It does so by imposing notice and obligations on companies, and it applies to businesses doing business in California. What that means, so a consumer is anyone who's a resident of California. A business is someone that does business in California. And there are a few limitations to that. So if you have annual worldwide gross revenue of $25 million, or if you buy or sell personal information of more than 50,000 consumers, or are controlled by one of those businesses, then you are subject to the CCPA. And buying and selling data is not as simple as, selling data for cash. It can be other kinds of good, valuable consideration received. If you share information in exchange for having information shared with you, that fits under California's definition of selling information. The categories of personal information is also quite broad. It's information that identifies, relates to, describes, is reasonably capable of being associated with, or could reasonably be linked directly or indirectly with a particular consumer or household. Exactly what that means is we will see how that plays out, but it's a very broad definition, and it's not just previously in a lot of the state data breach context, when you talk about personal information that would require a notification to a consumer, you're talking about first initial, last name, and a financial account or social security number, government ID number. This real core personal identification that could lead to identity theft. The definition in California is much broader. It really is, can you figure out who these people are? And reasonably be linked. What it requires a customer do is inform consumers what personal information you're collecting before or simultaneously with collecting it. And that there is still some, I think the industry is trying to figure out exactly what it means, what is required when it says you have to provide notice that discloses your practices. That that ought to be okay. I don't know that you necessarily have a pop-up opt-in, though certainly upon installation you ought to have an agreement to your privacy policy. If your policy changes, you ought to get agreement again. This is another challenge to implement is you need to provide the information to the customer request, and what that means is if let's see if I have a customer who asks for their information has to know not only what you're not only to have a disclosure in the privacy policy, but to actually get from you a report of the information you've collected on and access that information. Right to deletion, customers can have the right to ask that you delete their information. So you've collected information, you've got data on your customers, your users. You need to have a system to take them out of your database upon request. You need to have a way of implementing a request and verifying that the request is from the person who they say it's from. If you sell personal information or disclose it for business purposes, you have to disclose that information on request. So if I as a California consumer want to know how is my information being used and shared, I'm going to have a right to ask a company that collected the information, what information about me did you share with third parties? What was that information? Who were the third parties? What are they doing with it? And so I think that a lot of the litigation and the headlines that we see about privacy are really about this sort of the opaque information infrastructure and ecosystem that underlies the entire internet, but that a lot of users are not aware of and feel kind of creepy about when they find out about it. And you have a right to opt out of this sharing. This is something that was talked about in an earlier panel. it's going to be very important to have a way to sort of, on a user basis, remove individuals from data that's being shared in the aggregate. So you have to provide notice the customer has a right to opt out of the sale or disclosure of their personal information. And if it's requested, someone chooses to opt out, you have to honor that request. This is another big one. You cannot discriminate in price. So you can't have two separate prices, one for people who will share their information and not exercise their California consumer privacy rights, one for people who don't. There's some nuance to this. So you can't just say, well, this is a free ad-supported product, and if you choose to opt out of having your information shared, which is what makes the ads valuable because they can be targeted, then you have to pay us some amount of money. There is a bit of nuance there in that you can have different prices for different qualities of products. You can have a premium product, and if a different price that you charge has to have sort of some reasonable relationship to the cost of things. So that also remains to be seen exactly how that will play out. And you may offer customers a financial incentive to let you collect their data. I think this is where the legislature kind of wanted to go, was to give customers a kind of choice and say, well, we think our information is valuable, but we're willing to essentially sell it to you. And I haven't really seen that in practice a lot yet. There is, as I mentioned, there was a discussion about who could sue you if you didn't follow the California Consumer Privacy Act. And there was a big push from consumer advocates to extend this private right of action, which includes a right to sue on a class action basis, to any violation of the CCPA, which would mean that if you didn't have the right disclosure up at the right time, if someone asked to see their data, to get access to their data, but you didn't give it to them within the timelines, that they could then sue you. That's not the case. You can basically, an individual can file a lawsuit under the CCPA in the case of a data breach. So there's been unauthorized access, and there have been damage as a result. But and if they sue, they can get either their actual damages or a set amount, $100 to $750 per consumer. And these sorts of statutory damages do really drive litigation, because say you have a data breach that impacted 10 million California consumers, you're going to have a lawyer that's going to multiply 10 million times 750. And it's a good place to be as a plaintiff lawyer and a bad place to be as a defendant. There is a right for the Attorney General to sue to enforce other violations. And in that case, if a consumer thinks that they've had a violation of the CCPA other than a data breach, they can ask the Attorney General to enforce it. It could be cured within 30 days. And here too, you have civil penalties per violation. And so the big question is, what does all this really mean? And the law goes into effect January 1st, 2020. That's the effective date. And so by that date, under the law, you should have companies that collect information from their customers and about their customers should have notice of their practices up. They should have notice of the rights of consumers to request access, to request deletion of their data, and to opt out of data sharing and selling. And they should have a system in place for verifying those requests and implementing them. There is a target date of July 1st, 2020 for the Attorney General to begin enforcing the obligation. So this is a bit of a grace period. This is sort of the little bit of good news, is that there will be a 6-month grace period before which California is not going to file any lawsuits, the Attorney General, until July 1st. There also is a process ongoing right now where the Attorney General's office is trying to develop regulations that kind of flesh out some of these questions that are so vague right now. Question of what exactly does it mean to have verifiable customer consent? Those types of things. And that process is ongoing. We haven't seen the regs. We don't really know. So we're going into this brave new world fairly blind, but I think that people certainly need to be aware that there are real obligations with real teeth. It's coming in California, the largest state, and it will probably be coming in other states going forward. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to take questions about the CCPA.
Yeah, just real quick, what's your take, Josh Wetzel, company One Signal, question on a federal regulation? I know there's been a lot of discussion about that and overarching, where do we stand there, and do you think that's imminent, or?
I have to say, I don't think it's imminent. It's a great question. So the CCPA caused certainly a lot of hand-wringing among the industry. And I mean, it's in California, the home of the tech industry, right? It's mostly going to affect, I mean, it will affect very significantly companies that are a major part of the California economy. So there's a lot of desire on the part of the industry to have a single federal privacy regulation. And if Congress were to pass a law, it would preempt the state laws under the Supremacy Clause. So if the federal government decided to have a single federal privacy law, that would be the law. That's what's happened in the world of email. You have to comply with the CAN-SPAM Act when you send emails, but you don't have to comply with the Kansas Email Spam Act or the Ohio Email Spam Act. Unfortunately, getting anything done in Congress these days is very difficult, and there just has not been productive movement on it. People are talking about it, but I don't see it, frankly, I don't really see it happening. And not only that, I think that it is an issue where there are very powerful advocacy forces on both sides who, and so it's not, I mean, it would be better for the industry to have at least just one rule so you know what it was. But I don't know that there's any guarantee that it would necessarily be less onerous than the CCPA.
Okay, another question?
Hi, yeah, Michelle Novak. I'm with Iterable. You were talking about the buying and selling, like you have to be in the business of buying and selling data.
Yes.
So can you make some clarity around that? Because obviously everybody's very concerned about it, but that seems really specific.
So the challenge is that the way that selling data is defined in the CCPA is it means to sell, transfer or share for some valuable consideration. And the way that we're interpreting that, and that we're seeing a lot of others interpret it, is it applies to much of the data practices that we see. Certainly in the multi-channel retailer world, it's very common to engage in sort of co-op marketing, where data is shared collectively for purposes of targeting. All of that, I think, would meet the definition of selling. So it's not just like me selling my mailing list to you for a cash value. It could be a broader scope than that. And we will see. It could be that things get a little bit more narrowed, but I think a lot of the data practices that enable the kind of targeting that sort of underpins the internet are probably going to fall under that definition. And I think that's the way the Attorney General in California will interpret it.
Lastly, can you talk a little bit about the actual notification that's going to be required? Is it the fine print that's at the bottom that nobody reads, or is it going to be something different?
Sure. Well, so that's a very good point, and something that one thing that the CCPA requires is for companies that meet this definition of selling information, they need to put a link on their web page. And the CCPA all talks about websites. So here we're at an app conference. I mean, I think that some of the provisions are specific to what goes on your website. So it may be that you download the app and then have to go to the website of the app in order to exercise some of these rights, although how that works will be individualized. But there needs to be, among other things, a link on your homepage that says, do not sell my information. So if you want to opt out of having your information sold, that needs to be a very easy thing to do. Now, that having been said, again, when you think about operationally, what does that look like? You need to find a way to verify a request. Certainly, if you only have information about registered users, I think it makes sense to have that, basically send those people to their user account. They have to log in with their password. You know who they are. It becomes trickier with depending on the relationship that you have.
Great. Thank you, Nat.
Thanks.
Thank you. We're now going to take our lunch break. Lunch is served in the back of the room. You can get back to your tables and eat.